Hello, everyone. Welcome to the College Football Playbook Podcast. I'm Mark Givler, joined as always by Tyler Shoemaker. The college football playoff is here. The field is set. We had a lot of talk about this the last couple of weeks. You know, who was still actually still alive, kind of what would happen, kind of all the speculation. But the field is set. Georgia 1, Michigan 2, TCU 3, Ohio State 4. So we get Georgia, Ohio State in the Peach Bowl, Michigan, TCU in the Fiesta Bowl. First of all, let's get it right out of the way. Tyler, did you take any issue with what the committee decided here, both in terms of who got in and what the seeds were?
Yeah, no, I really didn't. I put out my resume ratings and I had it. I had the top five, in fact, exactly nailed. So based on resume, I think they did it right. I think, TCU did make it to their conference championship game, went to overtime, lost by 3. So I've got no problem with where it ended up. And probably the only maybe people that have an issue with it would be the Georgia fan base because it's like, okay, they could have potentially had TCU here in the semifinal, and instead they get Ohio State. And I don't think anyone would dispute that you'd probably rather play TCU than Ohio State in a playoff setting.
Yeah, and we will dive into that here in a second. But as we were kind of saying for a while now, Alabama doesn't sound like they were given much of a thought by the committee, despite what Twitter wanted us to
Yeah, I
discuss.
was,
And
I was going to
despite,
say not much of a thought from us either. So
I say this as someone in the media. This was a complete media creation. This whole Alabama thing was never feasible. Never made any sense. Nick Saban was on politicking, which, and by the way, I want to say this quick. Nick Saban was doing his job. I don't take issue before we go into this because I'm gonna, I may crack a joke or two, but I look. Nick Saban makes a small fortune to be the Alabama head football coach. So his fiduciary duty is to do whatever he can to get Alabama into the college football playoff. And I'm sure I know Ryan Day got a $250,000 bonus today for sneaking into the playoff. I'm sure Nick Saban has a similar structure to his contract. So the things we might say if $250,000 were at stake, if we could convince our audience. I say this all to say that I hold no ill will toward Nick Saban on this. He was doing what he should do, but I did find it funny. He started going down the gambling rabbit hole.
that was a nice nod to my people. Yeah, when I heard that, I was like, wait, what? Nick Saban is vouching for his team to make the playoff because they'd be power rated higher and favored on a neutral field. Like, I mean, I thought it was great, from sitting where I sit. But no, you're right. I don't have any issue with him going on there and doing his job and fighting for his guys. I have no problem with that. But again, if your only argument for we should make the playoff is like, well, we'd be favored, and I also should point out he, I answered his question on Twitter. I was like, well, Nick, when you're talking about the team you'd be directly compared to, which is Ohio State, they wouldn't be favored. So his kind of argument collapsed on itself, but it was kind of jarring to see him come from that angle.
Well, what other angle did he have? I mean, I don't know what angle he had. There's not a signature win on the resume. Sure, their losses were close. Is LSU good? I think LSU's pretty average. You win by the skin of your teeth against a really bad A&M team. I was kind of joking. I was at the Ohio High School Football State Championships, and we were so there's a lot of discussion of this up in the press box, in between games and things like that over the weekend. And my comment was like, Alabama tried like hell to go 7-5 this year. I mean, they really did. They avoided 7-5. You can say, oh, they could have been 13 or 12-0, whatever it was. They could have been 7-5. There was not a team on their schedule that, they didn't play Georgia. The only team on their schedule that I really should have competed with them did, and that was Tennessee, who controlled a large part of that game. Every other team on Alabama's schedule, they should not have been competitive with.
Yep.
And, bad games happen. Every team, I always say this, I say you play every team, regardless of what their talent level is, regardless of how good of a team they are, they play 2 games a year where they play out of their minds and they're almost going to take a miracle to beat them. They also will play 2 games a year that they can lose to just about anybody on that day, and they need some breaks to win those games. And then the other 8 games kind of tell you what a team is.
Yep.
And so Alabama in those other 8 games wasn't dominant. I mean, they didn't, they had it wasn't just 2 games where like, oh, they just didn't have their A game today. It was 5, 6 games.
Yeah.
It, like I said, I've said this before, it reminded me of 2015 Ohio State, who had all of that talent back from a national championship. I know Bama didn't win it all last year, but they have the Heisman quarterback back. They have the generational pass rusher back. You got Dallas Turner on the other side. You got defensive backs back coming back. They're highly touted, and they never seem to click. So I don't know what would your argument have been if you were Saban? I don't know what else you could have pointed to.
Yeah, no, I think I can't remember if he pointed it out or if they were talking about it on the broadcast, but talking about Ohio State, had a worse loss in terms of margin, and it's like, okay, fair, but also if you're going to hold that margin against Ohio State, you also have to give the Penn State margin to Ohio State, and Alabama didn't have anything resembling what Ohio State did to Penn State. So, I mean, to me, that's end of argument.
Yeah, I just think, again, I don't even think really Nick Saban necessarily was buying what he was selling there. I just think he was going through, doing what he has to do. I mean, you have to do it. We've seen it every year. So, the 4 that, we thought deserved to get in, got in. No real controversy there, I don't think. We can talk about TCU 3, Ohio State 4. My personal take, I don't know, no one ever said this. I don't think they would come out and say this. I don't know how much there were some controversial calls that went against TCU, I thought.
Yeah.
I thought they scored on 3rd down in overtime. I thought he reached it across.
Yeah.
That's obviously a huge thing. So I don't know if that, for me, I was okay with them at 3 because of some of that stuff. I thought there were 3 or 4 calls in that game that weren't great. They all seemed to go against TCU. And then of course it is, it's a field goal loss in overtime. But kind of your thoughts on that, and was this the right order?
Yeah, I think so. And before the weekend, I kind of was playing with my numbers and trying to do the hypotheticals of like, okay, what would this team's resume look like with a win this weekend versus with a loss? And pretty much I had Ohio State with a better resume than USC, even had USC beaten Utah. So for me, that was kind of my hang up, was like, why is USC 4 and Ohio State 5? Like we talked about on the last show, it was just a matter of when Ohio State lost, not that they lost. So USC losing kind of just like, that was just like destiny playing out, I think, because I think Ohio State had the better resume. But then from there, according to like my numbers and the way I was thinking about it, was whether TCU won or lost, I would have had them 3 based on resume. So I'm perfectly fine with the order.
Yeah, and like I just said, I am too. Like I said, I think the way that game played out, it's perfectly justifiable to keep TCU right there. So they don't go with the Ohio State Michigan rematch. First off, it's hard for me to believe, despite what we just said about TCU being just fine at number 3, they have, and I know the committee changes, but there's been 2 kind of consistent things with the committees kind of throughout this almost 10 years of data we have now. One thing they all have in common is they seem to just count losses.
Yep.
That kind of held up again. Although, again, I think the 4 teams should have got in, but they're not jumping 2-loss teams over 1-loss teams. They're not jumping 1-loss teams over undefeated teams. So they count losses, but they seem to, if they can justify it even just a touch, they don't like the first round, the semifinal rematch scenarios. Nope. They've avoided that like the plague. Do you think this was baked into this decision as well with the TCU 3, Ohio State 4, or just pure coincidence again?
Yeah, I mean it's tough to say because like I said, I think the numbers do justify it, and I think they probably were like, well, we do have a really good justification here. Let's just go with that and pretend that we don't think about the rematch. But then on the other hand, I was on with Tom and Tony talking about this, and there probably was a little devil on their shoulder though, saying like dollar signs. Think how much money you can make from this Ohio State Michigan rematch. I mean, and being able to talk that up for a month. So, I mean, it's almost like credit to the committee for not doing it because I mean that was a low hanging fruit money grab that they could have had there. But maybe they're just gambling and like maybe Ohio State and Michigan win and then we get the national championship. And that I think if that ends up being the national championship, I think that'll probably break or shatter viewing records for the college football national championship.
Yeah, and really what they're doing here is they're betting on Michigan because whether it's Michigan, Ohio State, or Michigan, Georgia, that's a ratings monster.
Yep.
Ohio State and Michigan both draw huge numbers. So Ohio State, Georgia is going to be a ratings monster. And you're still not going to get crushed there with Michigan TCU. Michigan draws extremely well. And you're going to have Ohio State fans glued to
Yeah.
that too. So you're going to get the Ohio. I think this is being a little, I'm a little bit of hyperbole here, but I think in essence, you're kind of getting that Ohio State Michigan game feel with Michigan TCU without actually having to make them play. What
Yeah.
Ohio State or Michigan fans not going to tune in to Michigan TCU? I
Yeah.
mean, they're especially because Ohio State's the late game. Everyone's going to watch that, I think. So, yeah, maybe you lose a fringe college football fan who watches the Ohio State Michigan game every November and maybe doesn't tune in now or something, but I think the way you've set this up, you're going to get the Ohio State Michigan type of draw without making them play each other. But yeah, we'll see. I could be dead wrong on that when the ratings come out after the games, but I think you're going to get both of those massive fan bases very much engaged. And then again, Ohio State plays after that, so you get the Ohio State Georgia game is going to be some massive draw for TV. But you're going to get the Ohio State fan base with that. But I think if Michigan wins, Michigan fans are going to be very, very curious about that game. And if Michigan loses, Michigan fans are going to be
They're gonna hate
maybe. I mean,
watch.
maybe they won't turn it off. I don't know if they're not going to watch. I don't know. Maybe they may be on there like, oh, please God, let Georgia just embarrass Ohio
Yeah.
State to wipe our tears away. I know Ohio State fans have done stuff like that in the past with Michigan, where it's like, well, we're eliminated or whatever, or this, that, and the other. But let's go and let's hope Michigan gets killed. So I think ratings are not going to be a problem.
Yeah.
But
And that's probably the consensus they came to as well. So it's like, well, we might as well go this way, avoid the rematch. We're still going to do huge numbers, and then, on the off chance, Ohio State, Michigan both win, then we're going to have a monster in the championship. So yeah, I agree.
so Ohio State will not be guaranteed their revenge opportunity. We'll see. I mean, could still happen, but they're not guaranteed that now. This has been a fascinating topic for me to kind of. I've spent more time than I'd like to admit in thought about all of this. Does Michigan or Ohio State win here by not having to play this game again right away, at least right away? Is this beneficial for either one? Is it beneficial for both? Is it beneficial for neither? I want to get your thoughts on this first. Like I said, I've put way too much thought into this, but Tyler, just what do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think probably because Michigan won the first matchup, I think Ohio State probably is in a better spot playing Georgia first because we saw in 2020 Ohio State was obsessed with getting back beating Clemson. Like that was their, they didn't have a Michigan game that year, so that was like they just let it all out. They fired all the bullets out of the chamber in that one. And then they got to the national championship and just had nothing left in the tank. I know there was some COVID and injuries and some other things that impacted that game, but I think emotionally going from that Clemson game to the Alabama game, I just don't think they had much left. And I think they could have put themselves in a similar situation where you build up for a month on the revenge factor, times two, because now you're trying to avenge two losses to Michigan. Even if they go out there, let it all out, beat Michigan in the semifinals, I would be curious to know how much they would have left in the tank after that. So I think it's probably a blessing in disguise for Ohio State that now they can just be businesslike, go play Georgia. If you win that, then you go let it all hang out in no matter what the last game of the season. I think that's probably a more advantageous situation for Ohio State.
So I think it benefits both. I think it benefits Ohio State more. But I think it benefits both Ohio State and Michigan to not have to play this game right out of the chute. I just look back to last year, and Georgia gets stomped by Alabama, but they don't have to play them again right away. They get in. Now, is the Michigan team Georgia played last year in the semis as good as, quite frankly, any of the teams in this year's playoff field? I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but I think there are a lot of things that help Ohio State here, as far as this being a better setup for them. The obvious negative is that they're playing Georgia, who is very, very good. And in my mind, probably I think Ohio State's less likely to beat Georgia than they would be to beat Michigan in the same situation. But with that out of the way, I don't think it was healthy for Ohio State to take on the same mentality as the fan base and obsess over Michigan and revenge and everything else for the next 4 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. I don't think that's a good place to be at if the ultimate goal is to actually win the national championship.
Yep.
You definitely hit on a little bit of that with the Clemson thing. There were, as you mentioned, other factors in the Alabama game, but it just felt like a team that had been working tirelessly just to get that Clemson revenge and maybe didn't fully realize, yeah, you got to win two if you want to win the national championship. Yeah. So, it's great. You got back at Clemson. Congrats. But, you got to win two. I think that could very well have happened to Ohio State here. I would much rather, if I were Ohio State, I would much rather play Georgia first. I would much rather have the extra time to prepare.
Yep.
You'll be at your healthiest that you can possibly be in that game. And again, you have that added time versus, spending the next 3 weeks obsessing over your rival. And then, oh, by the way, we have to refocus for
the best team in the country, with the best body of work in the country.
Team who, probably would have beat TCU pretty handily. And may not have had as much of a dogfight there. So I think there's a lot of positives there for Ohio State. Now, again, you have to be able to beat Georgia. So,
right.
But you were gonna play Georgia anyway.
Yep.
I mean, how many times out of 10 does TCU beat Georgia? Maybe one, maybe. So, again, extra time to prepare, get healthy, and not that you should need extra motivation when the national championship's on the line, but that Michigan game is going to be first. And I know, you're going to be in your game day routine at that point by the time your game kicks off, but you can get yourself into that mindset of not only are we facing the defending national champions, we're underdogs, we're in a hostile environment on the road. It's not going to be a true road game, but it's, you're playing in their backyard. But it's not a bad thing to have that Michigan carrot dangled out there. Oh, by the way, if you can pull this off, then you get, we're not just giving you your rematch. You have to go out there and earn your rematch. I think there's a motivational factor to that as well. And you've played Michigan. You're going to play that game a little bit differently if it happens again, but you've already prepped for them. You don't need 3 more weeks to prep for Michigan. It is easier to turn around and play a team you've already played and you
Yep.
didn't play them that long ago at
Yeah,
this
that's a
point.
great point.
So the game prep for Michigan, if you can beat Georgia, I think is much easier. But to the Ohio State fans who are on Twitter, oh please, we don't want to be embarrassed, all this other stuff. I think you've avoided that here.
Yep.
I don't know that Ohio State's going to beat Georgia. I'd be surprised if it was 31-0 like it was against Clemson a few years ago. I would be very surprised if it wasn't a very competitive game. I think you've avoided the ultra embarrassment scenario here because I really think the only way I could have seen Ohio State take an embarrassing loss in this upcoming playoff is if they do beat, or as if they beat Michigan in the first game, and they're so proud of themselves and patting themselves on the back, and they've climbed the mountain in their minds and everything else, and then it's like, oh yeah, you still have to play Georgia in a week, and then you go in there and they beat you by 30 because you accomplished what you want, you got your revenge, and you're happy. So I think this was the right setup for Ohio State. I also think it's the right setup for Michigan, though. Is it healthy if you're Michigan? Is it healthy for you to be asked about Ohio State getting its revenge on you for three? Like, is that really a place you want your program in for like a month? Being asked constantly about your rivals getting revenge, and they're going to do this differently, and this is this I think allows Michigan to have as loose of a 3 weeks of prep as you can. I think.
Yep.
And it takes out, again, I think the worst thing for Michigan's momentum right now would be to lose to Ohio State in a playoff scenario. You haven't eliminated that possibility, but
minimized it. Yeah.
Minimized it. You may not have to do it. You may not have to play them again until next year in Ann Arbor in November. I mean, so
Yeah.
I think Michigan wins here too. I think both teams win here.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think kind of what we're saying all boils down to is there's really no excuse, if you're Ohio State or if you're Michigan, you win your first, like there's not going to be that excuse, not that there's ever an excuse to lose the national championship, but you know what I'm saying? There's not going to be that like, well, we had to just let it all hang out in the first one. Like it's going to be evenly matched. Both teams have advantageous situations in the first round, even though inarguably Ohio State's playing the tougher opponent. But for all the reasons we just outlined, I think that makes it just a clean best man win national championship scenario if it gets to that point. I think that's a great point that you made there.
So the matchups are set. We'll probably do more talking about predictions and things like that later. I mean, we can't
We got time.
we can't do this the first day. The brackets just came out. Give us some time, for God's sake. But you have your power rankings and the lines are trickling out and things like that. What can you tell us, I guess, so far about these early lines? Your thoughts on it, and then if you want to sprinkle in your projections as well, and kind of where you had versus where you kind of had things in your power rating system, kind of what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so we'll start with Michigan TCU here. Line open 9.5 that I saw. I haven't seen a ton of movement. I think some books have touched 10. I projected 10.5. So, I'm close to where the line is, but it is through a key. I mean, 10 is a key number. So if you're betting this and you like Michigan, my advice would be to do it now before it goes north of 10, because then you've lost your value. In terms of the over under, the Michigan TCU over under 60.5. I projected 59.5. So unsurprisingly, it's a very sharp line here on this semifinal. Going to the other side though, Georgia Ohio State. This actually was interesting because generally with these type of like playoff games or primetime games, the lines are generally much sharper. Georgia open -6.5. I've got this Georgia minus like 2. Looking at the more recent performance, I can even maybe get to 6, but 6.5 is high. It jumped to 7 shortly after opening. I have seen some sharp books though start to drop down to 6, despite Georgia getting, the last time I checked, there were over 1,200 bets tracked at the Action Network. 90% of those bets and 90% of that money was on Georgia, but I have seen some sharp books go down to Georgia -6. So definitely something I'm keeping an eye on, and it is interesting. I'll probably end up on Ohio State +7 if I can get that here probably tonight.
Yeah, and like so for like some people might not quite grasp, the concept of what you're talking about with like, well, why would the line move that way if 90% of the action is on Georgia? And because I think there's still this notion out there that Vegas is attempting to get exactly 50% of the money on each side, and then they just take the juice at the end. And that's Vegas absolutely takes stances
Yep,
on some games. Not maybe
that's
not every game, but they absolutely are. There are some they take clear stances on.
yep, that's
We've
the
seen
perfect.
that here early.
Yep, that's the perfect way to describe it. And we saw that earlier in the season with Georgia Tennessee. I mean, everyone was on Tennessee. Tons of money, big money on Tennessee. And you saw that line go from like Georgia 7.5 to Georgia 8.5. And the line never, I'd have to go back and look, but I don't believe that line ever touched 7. It stayed 7.5 or north the whole time. And that's, to your point, the book's taking a stance and saying like, we're not gonna give Georgia betters a -7 here because we're gonna get killed. So they absolutely will take a stance. They don't necessarily want or need 50% of the money on each side because they're taking the juice either way. So they will absolutely take a stance if they feel like their number is right.
So anything, it doesn't sound like anything's totally shocking to you. Maybe that Georgia line a
Yeah,
little
yeah. I
high,
mean,
but I think there's a lot of people out there saying, "Oh, I thought it would be 8 or 9," and it's not. So,
yeah,
just kind of are things kind of where you expected them to be ballpark wise so far as they
yeah,
open?
yeah. And when I'm making a projection, I'm trying to obviously just get the true projection based on the full season's body of work. And when I said I can kind of see, I could get as high as 6. I plug in different formulas and analyze the data differently to just kind of see like, oh, who's playing better recently, or who's played better away from home, those type of things. So I can, like I said, I can see it even at Georgia -6 if you want to look at the recent performance, which would include Ohio State's loss, obviously. So that's a huge part of that is the Michigan game. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that. But yeah, I'm not surprised to see that the line was 6.5, under 7. I would be very surprised if it goes north of 7, though. I think there are sharp bettors that would be all over that, and I think there's sharp bettors that have been all over the 7 as well.
All right. Well, we are going to wrap this up here. Look, stay tuned to the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com @CFB Playbook. We're going to be breaking down a lot of the bowl games, maybe all of them. We'll see. See how much time we got. But we're going to get to a lot of the bowl games. We're going to take interesting looks both at, personnel and things like that. But we're also going to be talking to Tyler about, um, you know, the spreads and power ratings and just kind of things to look for on that on the analytics end as well. Um, Plenty of time to do all this with the next few weeks. We get a break before the playoffs, but we got bowl games starting here in less than 2 weeks. So we're gonna preview these things. We're gonna discuss them. We're gonna have a lot of stuff. We're gonna have predictions and things like that coming later. So stay tuned to that. If you're again, if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel already, please do that at youtube.com/@CFB Playbook. Thanks guys for listening. We will catch you again here by probably the next few days. We'll run another one and get everyone up to speed on some of the other bowl matchups and kind of what to look for in those. But I appreciate everyone watching and listening, and we will see you again soon.